Alias is highly customizable. Let's have a look at my interface and the way I have it laid out to be very efficient for me. I think this will give you some really good ideas of ways of organizing your interface, or if you're a new user, teach you how to customize it so that you can have good habits and workflows right from the beginning. I have a core set of tools that I believe if you learn these ones and become experts in them, you can basically build anything that you want. And you don't have to worry about all of the other functionality in the software. So let's jump right in and have a look in detail. Just a heads up, this may be a pretty long video. I think it has a lot of really good information that can help you be more efficient inside of Alias and improve your workflow. I'm going to go through each element of my interface. Let's just start with the general layout. I have the object lister on the left-hand side, control panel on the right, along with all of the diagnostic shading nested below that. I have my palette hidden or auto hide at the bottom, and then I have a custom shelf right in the middle, so it's easy to access and get to while I'm working inside of my perspective window. I pretty much work exclusively in perspective and use the view cube to navigate to all of the different regions or views, and I have orthographic faces turned on. Just click on this little arrow down, perspective with ortho face. The object lister I am a huge fan of. The object lister allows you to organize all of your layers and entities vertically, as opposed to what I believe is the default horizontal layer bar. This layer bar here is the worst in my opinion. Let's take a look at a big file. So I'll just switch over to this trike that I was working on. Let's go ahead and shade that. You can see that there's a ton of layers. Here's the vertical. And if I want to navigate those layers, I've got to scroll left and right, and that's just awful. I have hundreds of layers sometimes in my files. So I go ahead, I turn off that layer bar, the toggle layer bar, I get the extra pixel real estate, and I go with a complete vertical layout. And once you have a vertical layout, if I need to get to individual parts, I can just open that up or expand it. And then I have all sorts of assignment and selection features under right click. The nice thing as well is if you just expand it a little large, there's a search bar. So this is just a much better, in my opinion, a much better way of working. And I like it in the vertical orientation, so I have the most amount of layers exposed without having to scroll. So let's go back to our main stage. If you want to nest any window, you can tear it out, or you can hold Shift and just hover over top of the location that you want, and everything will reposition. I have my palette located at the bottom, and this as well is not only nested below the perspective window, which I think is important because often you'll have action items and buttons here in the lower right hand corner, and by having it nested, those buttons appear within the perspective interface, and that way it's very easy to select those and they don't get hidden behind some interface or placed on top of, say, the floating palette. I have auto hide selected, so here auto hide, and this arrow is pointing down, this red one, which will allow that interface to pop down below. It's out of sight. I only go to the palette if I absolutely need a tool that's not found in my shelf. Swinging around, let's talk briefly about the control panel and diagnostic shading. So the control panel, I just use the default control panel. There's actually several panels here. I use the default a lot and the visualize. Let's start with default. The default one here, some of these features I don't use necessarily as an icon, but I've gotten used to their location visually, so I leave them in their spot. So delete history, delete locators, toggle visibility, and invisible. And these two I always use kind of together, and that's why they're placed there together. The next is my mirror functions, so X, Y, and Z. And then below that are my curvature analysis tools. So evaluate continuity, surface continuity, and that would be positional, tangent, and curvature. Now, right now, let's look at the middle row, and each of them are named exactly the same. So if you just hit Control and double click with the left mouse button, you can pull up the rename tool, and I just kind of just double name them. So YY. And that, I think that just makes it a little easier to glance and know exactly which icon it is by having that. So here now it's X, Y, and Z. And again, that was just the control, holding down control with a left click. Let's talk a little bit about diagnostic shading. I don't use the shading functions very often. I might use the chrome setting or the sky reflection, but I use this feature mainly for draft analysis, isosophites, I can never say that word, and then some of the visual tools. And then I'm sure I'm going to be using box mode a lot more now that subdivision modeling is part of the software. So for something like the draft analysis tools, when you select those, I don't have any scene thing in the scene. Let's go ahead and just create a sphere and go to that. Then it gives me all of my functions below for analyzing draft, which is very important for production parts when you have tool and die information or just draft requirements for molding considerations or manufacturing considerations. So I like to have that separated. If I'm using it a lot, I might just tear it out, and that way I can make this panel as large as possible. This little arrow here will expand the palette. Now I have all of my analysis tools visible, and then when I'm done, I'll just bring that back over here and hold down Shift and drop it into below the control panel. The next section is the shelf, and I think this is a great way to start Alias for new users or experienced users. This is what I consider to be my core tools. Essentially, everything in here I highly use. I'm going to delete that one. It was leftover. I use on a regular basis, and I basically can model anything from this set of features. You don't have to learn all of the features inside of Alias to be a very proficient modeler for both concept and production. Really specialize in a core group, gives you one up, and then I go in and I'm familiar with all of the tools for those rare cases that I need those. Let's talk about each chunk of features and how I've divided those up. So the first setup is the curve tools, and I use very limited curves. I do not, nor do I recommend using blend curves. That's probably a sin for some people, but I'm just not a fan of blend curves. They require a different paradigm to use them, and additional tools in, say, your marking menus or hotkeys. And I think that's just, it's not necessary. There's a lot of better workflows, I believe, outside of blend curves. So I am mainly just a CV and edit point creation tools, curves. Notice that my edit points, I have a drop down and I have 1, 2, 3, and 5 degree variations. Let's take a look how I did that. So I'm going to switch over to my laptop tab, and the laptop tab has a reduced tool set. That way I can save screen real estate on a smaller resolution display. So here's my edit point. If I simply hold down Control and Alt and middle mouse button, I can duplicate icons, which is really cool. And now I can, rename this one, EP, let's say 2 degree. I'll set the option to 2 degree. And then if I middle mouse button and drag so that I get this arrow up, now it creates a new pullout menu. So I'll put EP curves, and I'll just abbreviate that. And so now I've got a drop-down menu that has all of my variations for my edit point curves within it. So that's a really nice way of having easy access to those edit points without having to open up the option box. The next one is the perpendicular to object with the key point curves. Key point curves have some really useful features. I don't recommend most of these. But for example, under this menu is the perpendicular line, and then also the line tool. And these are just fantastic. The perpendicular to line gives you a line that's perpendicular to whatever you snap to. So that's great for really controlling the layout of your curves or placement. And then the line curve, I use that almost like a dimension tool. So you can drag it out and it gives you a numeric number, a readout of your units. I'll use this for measurement, or I'll go in and say, let's say I needed to make something, 775 millimeters long. Great. So I just type that in and the curve will adjust to be that length. So, 500, it will reduce now to 500 millimeters. So I use this as a layout or control dimensions of the objects that I have in my scene. So that's those two features or functions for curves are amazing. The next one is the duplicate. Let's go ahead and just delete that. Duplicate curve, curve fillet, and freeform curve blend curves. And then notice how this is isolated with these little blank areas. If you go to Preferences, Interface, Shelf, Extras, brings up this little menu where you can drop these icons that don't have a function other than a visual breakup of a shelf or your marking menus, for example. So you can add little vertical lines or brackets or whatever you want to do. And in my case, I just have little blank squares that help isolate these functions into independent groupings. So curves, curve editing tools, or custom curves. Whoops, I should be on my workstation. Some of the object edit features, surface creation, a lot of my technical surfacing or symmetrical tools, and then my analysis tools. Two of the other ones that I didn't mention in the curves is curve sectioning, the ability to trim curves with other curves, and transform curve, which is like a curve stretch, curve transform. They're very similar, allows you to stretch a curve, not just on scaling, but the overall shape of it. The next group is Align. I'm a huge Align fan. Must be an expert in Align. And then I have two variations of Extend. And all this is this Extend has Merge turned on. And if you have Merge turned on, you only use Extrapolate. Never, ever, ever use Linear. Kind of joking, but it adds multi-knots for Linear. And there's better ways of doing that. So I always recommend if you have Merge on, use Extrapolate. If you need to make something linear, always have Merge off. So I have two icons for Extend because I use these all the time. Notice, if you just look real closely, these icons are slightly different. Any of the icons in Alias can be modified. This allows you to have a visual difference between these tools. If you hold down Control and Alt, left click, it will create an icon file, and this icon file is a TIFF format. So once you have that format, let's see here. Oh yeah, continue. So you can see here's the icon, TIFF, and I can open that in Photoshop, I could open on Sketchbook or Microsoft Paint, create a custom icon. In this case, I just added a white line and changed the color, and then hit save, and then Alias will use that custom icon. I've seen people change these out for skulls or using other applications icons such as like Rhino or Maya or something like that. Or over here where I have X, Y, and Z, some people will put just a straight up X right on top of these icons, a Y and a Z or something like that. So you can real quickly look at the icon and know exactly which settings you have customized inside. I have the new offset tools for surface and for curves, and then detach. The next group is all my surfacing tools. So rail and square, I use those interchangeably, but I try to use freeform blend whenever I can. I highly recommend some of the newer surfacing tools. I don't use these as often as I used to. And then surface fillet for any of the transitions. These probably should be organized more like this, but surface fillet and ball corner go somewhat hand to hand. Ball corner allows you to have a blended three-sided fillet intersection. That's a great tool. Tubular offset for offsetting either curve on surfaces or trim edges. and then draft, model place surface draft. And these are my core surfacing tools. That's basically all I use for most of my projects, regardless if it's concept or for production. Trim convert allows you to take a four-sided trim patch and convert it to a natural boundary surface, which is awesome for really controlling or technical surfacing, Class A modeling parts. Planarize hull allows you to move all your hulls into a plane or a straight line, both symmetrical modeling and symmetry plane align. And then my construction plane and toggling. These are deviation tools. So under locators, deviation, curve to curve, surface to surface, curve to surface. I use those all the time because I'm always building to, with gaps in mind or very precise positions of objects relative to each other. So I'm always analyzing those. So they're in a very dominant location on my shelf. Stitching, I constantly am stitching to check to make sure I have good quality surfaces and intersections. And when I send data off to CATIA or to NX or something, I'll want to make sure that it stitches within a specific tolerance. And then my normal, flipping normals for various tools and reasons. That's over all my shelf. And if you just have this shelf and learn that, if you're a new user or existing user, definitely consider something very close to this. Some alternative tools that I see people use. In the surfacing tools, you may want to consider the revolve tool or extrude is a popular tool. And then there's a lot of kind of new, very specific functionalities for surfacing as well. Let's talk a little bit about marking menus. So left, middle, right. And we'll just open up the interface for this. And yeah, go from here. So this is, let's go to the left mouse button, all my selection tools. I'm a huge template user. So template is part of my selection tools. This one is curves. And this one is surfaces. So I'll just call it surf. And then I have transform CV tool in my pick tools, although it could be in my middle mouse button as well. You have to learn this tool. This is one of those tools that if you are pushing and pulling CVs or hulls, this is the best, hands down the best way to do that. And then below, I have all of my other selections that I use every once in a while, but I like to have them on my marking menus, and I use those blank dividers in the shelf extras to add a divider or a blank space between these, so I can quickly see where the tool is in that drop-down list. The middle mouse button looks like this. I used to have, move, scale, rotate, which I think is some of the defaults, but I hardly ever use scale and rotate. So scale could actually drop down here, where already rotate, non-proportional scale, and center pivot are found. And then I have the addition, or I always use project, always use intersect, project normal right in the middle, untrim and trim. And adding these surface edit tools has greatly improved my efficiency in my marking menus because I use those on such a regular basis. I want them very easy to access and within the software and not have to go to a menu. And then if I go to the right mouse button for my marking menus, selecting those templates, controls on, control off, hide unselected, visible, so those kind of go hand in hand. Hardware shading, I'm a huge hardware shade fan, and then I'm always toggled the model in order to see the hardware shade. And then this guy right in the middle, query edit. This tool is amazing. You have to use this. It allows you to access the construction history of geometry, get a lot of information from some geometry, and just in general, I'm always using query edit. And then below, you can see I have two blanks here, and what that does is gives me even a larger gap. When I need to go to the toggle grid, I can just drop right down, be able to select that very easily by having that little extra gap. Hotkeys are the next section that we should just briefly talk about. So the big ones are cut, copy, and paste. And with paste, try this. Try the always ask in the layer options. And what that does, let's just grab we'll just grab a cube or something. I just hit Alt L, which is another hotkey to look at this cube. What that does is that when I copy and I paste, I can paste with these. I can create let's say a new layer, and I'll just call it, cube. All right, so there's my cube layer now. It automatically created. Or I could paste it into an existing layer that's already in my scene. So for example, let's just say surfaces. And so it keeps me very organized for when I'm copying and pasting objects and different parts of tools, that I can come over here and automatically paste them into various layers. So that's an awesome feature to know. We talked a little bit about delete locators and construction history. Those are some of my most used features there. Another one that's important for me is creating new layers. I have it set to Control-N, which I believe is the Photoshop hotkey. So it's just kind of keep it consistent with something else. And then I use Control-6, apply shaders all the time. And then for me, Control-5, which is the default information window. Control-7, I use the deviation table when I'm hand modeling continuity. You made it to the end of the video. I wasn't expecting very many people to last this long. I hope you were able to learn something and to either take my interface as inspiration to modify your own, or just use mine. I don't care if you take it, modify it, share it with your friends. It doesn't really matter. If you have core tools that you like to use or different methodologies that help speed up your workflow, please share those in the comments. It's great for everybody to see and to hear how other people are using the software. My only mission is to be able to raise the bar of everybody using Alias so that we can make absolutely the best models out there possible and address this huge need that's in the 3D industry, or sorry, the automotive industry right now. Cool. Like, comment, subscribe. Really appreciate your time. I'll see you guys on the next video. Keep surfing.